She defended herself from 3 masters who tried to touch her. The Oklahoma Historical Society receives donations of historical materials regularly, but some acquisitions arrive with documentation so powerful they fundamentally change our understanding of resistance under slavery. On a morning in June 2024, archivist Dr. Sarah Mitchell opens a package that will lead her to uncover the story of one of the most fierce defenders of bodily autonomy in the history of American slavery. A woman whose repeated, successful resistance to sexual assault made her legendary among enslaved people and feared by slave owners across Oklahoma Territory. The donation comes from a descendant of a family that operated in Oklahoma Territory in the 1850s and 1860s. The letter explains that while sorting through family materials, the donor discovered a photograph, legal documents, and testimony that she believes documents a significant but hidden history of resistance to sexual violence under slavery. Sarah carefully removes the contents from the package. The first item is a photograph, clearly styled to resemble an early 20th century documentary print. The image shows a young black woman in what appears to be a kitchen or laundry environment, with steam rising from large metal tubs behind her and soft light filtering through a window. The woman stands in 3/4 profile, turning just enough to meet the camera with a faint, knowing, half smile. She appears to be in her late 20s or early 30s, wearing a simple work dress with rolled sleeves and a headscarf wrapped neatly around her hair. What immediately catches Sarah's attention is a thin, healed scar curving down the right side of the woman's face, subtle but unmistakable, adding a layer of lived history to her otherwise calm expression. Despite the steamy, labor-intensive setting, the woman's posture is relaxed rather than burdened. Her shoulders are square, her gaze self-possessed. There's something in her direct eye contact with the camera that Sarah recognizes from years of studying photographs of formerly enslaved people. A refusal to look away, an assertion of dignity and personhood, a challenge to the viewer to see her as fully human rather than as property or victim. Sarah turns the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, Naomi Williams, Oklahoma Territory, 1867. Photograph taken 2 years after emancipation. Known during slavery as the woman who could not be touched, successfully defended herself from assault by 3 different slave owners between 1858 and 1863. Scar on face from defending herself against Thomas Garrett in 1860. After emancipation, gave extensive testimony documenting sexual violence under slavery. The most feared name among slave owners in Oklahoma Territory. And below that, in different handwriting, added much later, they called her dangerous because she refused to be violated. She proved that resistance was possible, even in the most powerless circumstances. Her testimony helped document what thousands of enslaved women endured. Sarah reads the inscription 3 times, her heart pounding. Naomi Williams had successfully defended herself from sexual assault attempts by 3 different slave owners over a 5-year period during slavery. She had become known as the woman who could not be touched, a reputation that acknowledged her fierce resistance. And after emancipation, she had given testimony documenting sexual violence under slavery, helping create a historical record of crimes that were systematically hidden. Sarah spends the rest of that day examining the other materials in the package. There are bills of sale showing Naomi being sold 3 times between 1858 and 1863, each sale including notes about her being difficult to manage and resistant to authority. There are legal complaints filed by slave owners seeking compensation for injuries they claimed Naomi had inflicted while resisting legitimate correction. And most importantly, there's a transcript of testimony Naomi gave in 1866 to officials investigating conditions under slavery in Oklahoma Territory. From the earliest bill of sale, dated 1858, one Negro woman, Naomi, age approximately 20, sold by the estate of William Crawford to Thomas Garrett of Oklahoma Territory. Price, $800. Warning: this woman has shown resistance to discipline and has violently opposed attempts at correction. She injured Mr. Crawford's hand severely when he attempted to administer punishment. Buyer assumes all risk. Sarah's pulse quickens. The punishment and correction that Naomi had violently opposed was almost certainly a euphemism for sexual assault. The bill of sale is essentially warning the new owner that Naomi would physically resist rape attempts and documenting that she had already injured one slave owner who tried to assault her. She finds the next bill of sale from 1860. One Negro woman, Naomi, age approximately 22, sold by Thomas Garrett to Samuel Patterson of Oklahoma Territory. Price, $600, reduced due to temperament and injury inflicted. This woman viciously attacked her owner when he attempted to enforce discipline, resulting in serious injury to Mr. Garrett. She bears a scar on her face from the altercation. Buyer is warned that this woman is dangerous and may require extraordinary measures to control. The price had dropped by $200. Naomi's reputation for resistance had made her less valuable as enslaved property, and she now bore a scar from the altercation with Thomas Garrett, permanent evidence of her fight to defend herself from assault. Sarah contacts Dr. Marcus Thompson, a historian at the University of Oklahoma, who specializes in slavery in Oklahoma Territory and the specific experiences of enslaved women facing sexual violence. Marcus has spent decades documenting cases of resistance that were hidden or mischaracterized in historical records. Marcus calls her back within an hour. Naomi Williams. The name is vaguely familiar from my research on enslaved people in Oklahoma Territory. If you've found her complete testimony documenting her resistance to sexual assault, this is extraordinary. Sexual violence against enslaved women was systematic and pervasive, but we rarely have detailed accounts from women who successfully resisted multiple times. Send me everything. Sarah scans all the materials and emails them to Marcus. They arrange to meet at the Oklahoma Historical Society in Oklahoma City, where Marcus has already requested territorial records, court documents, and any available documentation about enslaved people in Oklahoma Territory during the 1850s and 1860s. That evening, Sarah reads through Naomi's testimony, given to federal officials in Fort Smith, Arkansas, in December 1866, just 18 months after emancipation. The testimony is extensive, over 20 pages, and provides a detailed, unflinching account of Naomi's repeated resistance to sexual assault and the price she paid for that resistance. From Naomi Williams's testimony, delivered December 1866, "My name is Naomi Williams. I chose the name Williams when I became free because it was my mother's family name, before she was enslaved. I was born enslaved in Arkansas in 1838. When I was approximately 15 years old, I was sold to a man named William Crawford, who owned land in what is now Oklahoma Territory. Mr. Crawford purchased me with the specific intention of using me for both labor and for what he called companionship, which was a polite word for rape. When I arrived at his property, He made clear to me that I would be expected to submit to him sexually whenever he demanded. I refused. I told him directly that I would not consent to being raped, that I would fight to defend myself, that he could beat me or kill me, but I would not submit. Mr. Crawford became enraged. He attempted to force himself on me that very night. I fought back with everything I had. I scratched his face, bit his hand severely enough to cause significant injury, and when he tried to restrain me, I grabbed a fireplace poker and threatened to strike him if he came closer. He finally backed away, cursing me and threatening that he would have me whipped for my resistance. The next day, Mr. Crawford did have me whipped by his overseer, 20 lashes for striking my master and threatening violence. But that night, when he tried again to assault me, I fought back again. This pattern continued for weeks. He would attempt to rape me. I would fight back. He would have me punished. And then he would try again. Each time I resisted successfully, though the cost was severe beatings and other punishments. After approximately 2 months, Mr. Crawford gave up trying to rape me personally. But he then began allowing or encouraging other white men on his property, overseers, visitors, hired workers, to attempt to assault me, perhaps thinking I would be less able to resist multiple men over time. But I resisted every attempt. I kept weapons hidden, a knife I had stolen from the kitchen, rocks I had collected, any implement I could use to defend myself. I injured several men who tried to assault me. Word began to spread among white men in the area that I was dangerous, that attempting to rape me would result in injury. Mr. Crawford eventually decided I was more trouble than I was worth. I was not sufficiently productive as a field laborer because I was frequently being punished for my resistance to sexual assault, and I was dangerous to have on the property because I had injured multiple white men. He sold me in 1858 to Thomas Garrett for $800. Thomas Garrett purchased me knowing my reputation for resistance, but he believed he could break me through sufficient violence and intimidation. He was wrong. On my first night on Garrett's property, he came to the quarters where I was housed and attempted to assault me. I had prepared. I had hidden a heavy piece of firewood under my sleeping mat. When Garrett grabbed me, I struck him with the firewood. The blow opened a deep gash on his arm that required stitches. Garrett was furious and had me dragged to the barn where he whipped me himself, 50 lashes that left my back scarred permanently. But Garrett was not deterred. He became obsessed with raping me, viewing it as a challenge to his authority and masculinity that I continued to resist. Over the next 2 years, Garrett attempted to assault me dozens of times. Each time I fought back using whatever means were available, scratching, biting, striking with whatever objects I could reach, screaming to alert others and force witnesses to the attempted rape. In 1860, Garrett trapped me in the kitchen house when I was working alone. He blocked the door and advanced toward me, stating that this time I would submit, or he would beat me to death afterward. I grabbed a kettle of boiling water from the stove and threw it at him, scalding his chest and arms severely. While he was screaming in pain, I grabbed a kitchen knife. Garrett lunged at me despite his burns. We struggled. The knife cut his hand badly. He would carry scars from that wound for the rest of his life. But during the struggle, he struck me across the face with such force that his ring opened a gash down my cheek. That is the scar I still carry, the mark of defending myself from Thomas Garrett's attempted rape. Other enslaved people heard the commotion and came running. They found Garrett bleeding and burned, and me with blood running down my face, still holding the knife. Garrett had me chained in the barn and left there without food or water for 3 days. Then he had me whipped again, 100 lashes this time, administered over 2 days, because he wanted to prolong my suffering. After I had somewhat recovered, Garrett tried one more time to assault me. I had hidden a sharp piece of metal from farm equipment. When he grabbed me, I stabbed him in the thigh. Not deeply, but enough to wound him and make him back away. Garrett realized then that I would never stop fighting, that every attempt to rape me would result in his injury, that I was willing to die rather than be violated. Garrett sold me in 1860 to Samuel Patterson for $600, a reduced price because my reputation for resistance had spread throughout Oklahoma Territory. Slave owners knew that purchasing me meant purchasing someone who would fight back violently against sexual assault, someone who had injured multiple white men, someone who was considered dangerous. Samuel Patterson attempted to assault me only once, in 1861. I had obtained a small pistol, stolen from Patterson's house, and when he came to my quarters that night, I pointed the pistol at him and told him clearly that if he touched me, I would shoot him. I meant it absolutely, and Patterson could see that I meant it. He backed away and never attempted to assault me again. However, Patterson kept me isolated and under heavy supervision because he feared what I might do with that pistol. He eventually discovered it and confiscated it, but by then, my reputation was so widespread that even without a weapon, Patterson was afraid to assault me himself and would not allow other white men on his property to attempt it either. In 1863, Patterson sold me again, this time to a man named Henry Morrison, for an even lower price of $500. Morrison purchased me specifically because he wanted field labor and had been told I was a strong worker when not being assaulted. Morrison's wife, interestingly, insisted that I not be harmed and that her husband not attempt to assault me. I don't know if Mrs. Morrison was sympathetic to my situation or simply wanted to avoid the chaos that my resistance caused, but for the first time in my enslaved life, I was not subjected to attempted rape. I remained on Morrison's property until 1865, when emancipation came to Oklahoma Territory. I was approximately 27 years old. I had been enslaved for my entire life. I had successfully defended myself from sexual assault dozens of times over 7 years, injuring multiple white men who tried to rape me. I carried permanent scars from the beatings and violence I endured as punishment for defending my bodily autonomy. I file this testimony because I want the world to know that enslaved women were not passive victims. We resisted. We fought back. Some of us, like me, successfully defended ourselves from rape, even though the cost was severe violence and suffering. Thousands of enslaved women were raped regularly throughout their lives, but many of us resisted when we could, and some of us resisted successfully. I also want to document the specific men who attempted to assault me. William Crawford, Thomas Garrett, and Samuel Patterson. These men tried to rape me multiple times. They beat me savagely when I resisted. They sold me when they realized I would never stop fighting back. They should be remembered as rapists who were thwarted by a woman they considered their property, but who refused to be violated. Since emancipation, I have been living in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I work as a laundress, and I am building a life where I control my own body, my own labor, and my own future. The scar on my face reminds me daily of what I survived and what I defended. I am not ashamed of that scar. It is evidence of my resistance, proof that I fought back, a permanent mark of my refusal to be violated. I hope this testimony will help people understand that sexual violence was systematic under slavery, that enslaved women were subjected to constant threat of rape, and that many of us resisted, even though resistance often meant severe punishment or death. My story is not unique in that I was threatened with sexual assault. That was the experience of most enslaved women. My story is unusual only in that I successfully resisted multiple times and survived to tell about it. I want enslaved women's resistance to be remembered. I want the names of rapist slave owners to be documented. And I want people in the future to know that even in the most powerless circumstances, resistance was possible, and some of us never stopped fighting. Sarah finishes reading with tears streaming down her face. Naomi Williams's testimony is one of the most powerful accounts of resistance to sexual violence under slavery that she has ever encountered. Naomi had fought back repeatedly, had injured multiple men who tried to rape her, had been sold 3 times because of her resistance, had been beaten savagely as punishment, and had never stopped defending herself. Sarah and Marcus meet at the Oklahoma Historical Society 3 days later. Marcus has found extensive additional documentation that corroborates and expands on Naomi's testimony. From territorial court records, Marcus has found legal complaints filed by Thomas Garrett in 1860 seeking compensation for injuries maliciously inflicted by slave woman Naomi. The complaint describes Garrett's burns from boiling water, his cut hand, and demands that either Naomi be put to death for attacking a white man, or that he receive compensation for his medical expenses and for Naomi's reduced value due to her reputation for violence. The court denied Garrett's request for Naomi's execution, but did order that she be sold, and that Garrett be partially compensated from the sale price. The ruling stated, "While this court recognizes the serious nature of a slave violently resisting her master, the evidence suggests that the slave woman was defending herself from unwanted sexual advances. While such advances are within a master's rights regarding his property, the court acknowledges that violent resistance to such advances, while punishable, does not merit execution. The slave shall be sold, and Mr. Garrett compensated for his injuries." The court actually acknowledged that Garrett was attempting to rape Naomi, Marcus says, amazed. They ruled it was within his rights as a slave owner, but they also tacitly acknowledged her right to defend herself by refusing to execute her. That's extraordinary for 1860 Oklahoma territory. They find similar documentation from other cases. Legal records show that William Crawford filed a complaint in 1858 about Naomi viciously biting his hand and threatening him with a weapon. Samuel Patterson filed a report in 1861 about Naomi possessing a stolen pistol and threatening him with it. From newspaper archives, they find references to Naomi that confirm her reputation. From the Oklahoma Territorial Gazette, 1861, "The Dangerous Negress. A slave woman known as Naomi has gained notoriety throughout the territory for her violent resistance to proper discipline. This woman has injured multiple white men who attempted to correct her behavior, and has been sold 3 times due to her ungovernable temperament. Slave owners are advised to exercise extreme caution if considering purchase of this woman, as she has proven herself willing to use deadly force to resist her master's authority. Some question whether such a dangerous individual should be allowed to live, while others suggest her continued resistance indicates insufficient severity in punishment." From a black newspaper published in Fort Smith after the war, they find an article celebrating Naomi's resistance. From the Fort Smith Freedmen's Advocate, 1867, "The Woman Who Could Not Be Touched." Mrs. Naomi Williams, who resides in our city, has become known among formerly enslaved people as a hero of resistance. During her years in slavery in Oklahoma Territory, Mrs. Williams successfully defended herself from sexual assault by 3 different slave owners, injuring each of them and forcing them to eventually cease their attempts to violate her. Mrs. Williams was beaten savagely as punishment for her resistance, bears permanent scars from those beatings, and was sold 3 times because her reputation for defending herself made her undesirable to slave owners who wanted to rape their female slaves without resistance. Mrs. Williams has given testimony documenting her experiences, and her story serves as an inspiration to formerly enslaved women who survived similar assaults, and to those who, like Mrs. Williams, found ways to resist. Marcus and Sarah work to trace what happened to Naomi after 1867. They find her listed in the 1870 census in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Naomi Williams, age 32. Occupation laundress, able to read and write. By 1870, she had learned to read and write, a remarkable achievement for someone who had been enslaved until age 27. They find records showing that in 1872, Naomi married a man named Isaiah Freeman, a formerly enslaved person who had fought for the Union during the Civil War. Census records show them living together with 3 children by 1880, children Naomi had chosen to have, in a relationship she had chosen, living in freedom. They find that Naomi became active in organizations supporting formerly enslaved people. From records of the Freedmen's Aid Society, they discover that Naomi spoke at multiple gatherings in the 1870s and 1880s, discussing her experiences and advocating for recognition of sexual violence as one of slavery's worst crimes. From a description of one such speech, given in 1878, Mrs. Naomi Freeman, formerly Williams, addressed the gathering about her experiences resisting sexual assault during slavery. Mrs. Freeman spoke frankly about the systematic rape of enslaved women and about her own repeated, successful resistance to assault by 3 slave owners. She showed the scar on her face that resulted from defending herself, and she called on society to recognize that enslaved women's resistance to rape was heroic, not criminal. Mrs. Freeman received a standing ovation, and many women in the audience, both white and black, expressed gratitude that she was willing to speak openly about experiences that are usually hidden in shame. They find that Naomi lived until 1903, dying at age 65. Her obituary in a black newspaper in Fort Smith was extensive. Mrs. Naomi Freeman, hero of resistance, dies at 65. Mrs. Freeman, who passed away Tuesday at her home in Fort Smith, was one of the most courageous women of our era. Born into slavery, subjected to repeated attempted sexual assaults, Mrs. Freeman fought back every time, injuring multiple slave owners and refusing to be violated despite savage beatings and punishments. Her resistance made her legendary among enslaved people in Oklahoma Territory, who called her the woman who could not be touched. After emancipation, Mrs. Freeman gave testimony documenting her experiences and became an advocate for recognition of sexual violence as one of slavery's worst crimes. She spoke openly about her resistance, showing the scars she carried as evidence of the price she paid for defending her bodily autonomy. Mrs. Freeman married, had children, built a life in freedom, and never stopped advocating for formerly enslaved women who had survived sexual violence. Mrs. Freeman is survived by her husband Isaiah, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. She will be remembered as a woman who refused to be broken, who proved that resistance was possible even in the most powerless circumstances, and who helped ensure that enslaved women's experiences and resistance would be documented for history. Over the following months, Sarah and Marcus worked to create an exhibition that honors Naomi's fierce resistance, while honestly documenting the sexual violence that enslaved women faced. They contact genealogists who help them locate Naomi's descendants, finding a great-great-granddaughter living in Oklahoma City who has family stories about Naomi, but never knew the full details of her resistance. 14 months after Sarah first opened that package, the Oklahoma Historical Society opens the exhibition The Woman Who Could Not Be Touched, Naomi Williams and Resistance to Sexual Violence Under Slavery. The exhibition occupies a major gallery designed to honor Naomi, while unflinchingly documenting the systematic sexual violence that enslaved women faced and the various forms of resistance they employed. The centerpiece is the 1867 photograph. Naomi at age 29, standing in her workplace, the scar visible on her face, her expression calm and self-possessed, her direct gaze meeting the camera with quiet strength. A detailed explanation accompanies the image. Naomi Williams was photographed in 1867, 2 years after emancipation. During slavery, she successfully defended herself from sexual assault attempts by 3 different slave owners between 1858 and 1863. She injured multiple men who tried to rape her, was beaten savagely as punishment for her resistance, and was sold 3 times because her reputation for defending herself made her dangerous and undesirable to slave owners. The scar visible on her face resulted from defending herself against Thomas Garrett's assault attempt in 1860. After emancipation, Naomi gave extensive testimony documenting sexual violence under slavery and became an advocate for recognition of enslaved women's resistance. The exhibition tells Naomi's complete story through her own testimony, legal documents, bills of sale, newspaper accounts, and historical context. It doesn't shy away from the reality of what Naomi faced, the attempted rapes, the violence she endured as punishment for resistance, the permanent scars she carried. But it centers her agency, her fierce determination to defend herself, and her ultimate success in preventing her assaults despite enormous risks. One section examines the systematic nature of sexual violence under slavery. Historical documents, testimony from other formerly enslaved women, and scholarly analysis show that rape was endemic to slavery, that enslaved women were subjected to constant sexual threat from slave owners, overseers, and other white men, and that resistance was dangerous but not impossible. Another section documents Naomi's specific acts of resistance, the times she fought back, the weapons she used or improvised, the injuries she inflicted on men who tried to rape her, and the price she paid in beatings and other punishments. The exhibition makes clear that Naomi's resistance was extraordinary, not because other enslaved women didn't resist, but because she successfully resisted multiple times over several years, and survived to document her experiences. The exhibition includes the bills of sale, showing how Naomi's reputation for resistance affected her value as enslaved property. The declining prices and the warnings to buyers document how slave owners viewed women who defended themselves as dangerous and undesirable. Enslaved women were supposed to submit to rape, and those who fought back were considered defective property. A section on legal documentation shows the court records and complaints filed by slave owners seeking compensation for injuries Naomi inflicted. The exhibition analyzes these documents to show how the legal system simultaneously upheld slave owners' right to rape enslaved women, while occasionally acknowledging that violent resistance to rape, while punishable, was understandable. The exhibition also documents what happened after emancipation: Naomi's testimony, her advocacy work, her speeches about sexual violence and resistance, her marriage and family, and her life, building a future where she controlled her own body and choices. Photographs, census records, and organizational documents show Naomi as a complete person, not just a victim or a fighter, but someone who built a full life after slavery. A video plays continuously featuring historians discussing sexual violence under slavery, the various forms of resistance enslaved women employed, and the importance of documenting both the violence and the resistance. Naomi's great-great-granddaughter shares family stories and reflects on her ancestors' courage. On opening day, Sarah stands in the gallery watching visitors engage with the exhibition. She sees people study Naomi's photograph, understanding gradually that the calm, self-possessed woman in the image had survived extraordinary violence and had fought back with fierce determination to protect herself. Marcus stands beside her, looking at the image. Naomi was 29 years old when this photograph was taken, he says quietly. She'd been free for just 2 years after spending her entire life enslaved. She'd successfully defended herself from rape dozens of times. She'd been beaten savagely, scarred permanently, sold 3 times because she was too dangerous to keep. But look at her face. There's no defeat there, no shame. There's strength and dignity. She's looking at the camera like she's challenging us to see her fully, to understand what she survived and what she defended. That scar on her face isn't something to hide. It's a mark of her resistance, proof that she fought back. Naomi's great-great-granddaughter, Dr. Michelle Freeman, stands with them, tears streaming down her face. I knew family stories about Naomi being strong and brave, she says, but I never knew the specifics, that she fought off 3 different slave owners who tried to rape her, that she injured multiple men, that she was sold 3 times because of her resistance. I never knew about her testimony or her advocacy work. Seeing all of this documentation, understanding what Naomi survived and how fiercely she defended herself, I am in awe. She proved that even in the most powerless circumstances, resistance was possible. She refused to be violated, and she survived to tell her story and help others. A young black woman approaches them after spending a long time reading Naomi's testimony. "Thank you for this exhibition," she says. "We learn about slavery's brutality, but we don't often learn about the sexual violence that was systematic, that every enslaved woman faced constant threat of rape. And we almost never learn about the women who fought back successfully. Naomi's story is devastating in what she had to endure, but it's also inspiring. She never stopped fighting. She never surrendered her bodily autonomy, even when resistance meant terrible punishment. That's extraordinary courage." An elderly white woman stops to read the legal documents for a long time. "These court records," she says, her voice shaking. "They acknowledge that these slave owners were trying to rape Naomi. The court says it was within their rights to rape their slaves, but also that Naomi's resistance was somewhat justified. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. How could they simultaneously believe that rape was an owner's right and that resistance to rape was understandable? The legal system was so twisted by slavery. that it couldn't even maintain logical consistency. Throughout the day, visitors engaged deeply with the exhibition, understanding that Naomi's story represents both the worst brutality of slavery, systematic sexual violence against enslaved women, and the remarkable resistance that some women were able to mount despite impossible circumstances. The photograph that shows a calm, self-possessed woman reveals itself to be a portrait of someone who had survived extraordinary violence and had fought back with fierce determination. As the museum prepares to close that evening, Sarah walks through the gallery one more time. She stops in front of Naomi's photograph, looking at that direct, knowing gaze, at the scar that marks her face, at the quiet strength in her posture. She thinks about Naomi Williams, subjected to attempted rape dozens of times over 7 years, fighting back every single time, injuring multiple white men who tried to assault her, beaten savagely as punishment, sold 3 times because her resistance made her dangerous, carrying permanent scars from defending herself, and never, ever stopping her resistance. She thinks about the thousands of other enslaved women who faced similar assaults, and who resisted in whatever ways they could, fighting back physically when possible, finding ways to avoid situations where assault was likely, supporting each other through networks of protection, surviving trauma, and continuing to live and to protect their children. And she thinks about Naomi's life after slavery, her testimony documenting what she had survived, her advocacy work speaking openly about sexual violence when most people wanted to hide it in shame, her marriage and children chosen freely, her decades building a life where she controlled her own body and future. The photograph waited 157 years to tell Naomi's full story. The image that shows a woman in her workplace, bearing the scar of resistance, meeting the camera with a calm, knowing gaze, has become testimony to courage, to fierce defense of bodily autonomy, and to the refusal to be violated even when the cost was terrible suffering. Now the photograph has fulfilled a purpose Naomi surely intended when she agreed to be photographed with that scar visible, with that direct gaze challenging the viewer. Her story has been told, her resistance has been documented, her courage has been celebrated, and future generations can understand that even in slavery's worst brutality, resistance was possible, and some women never stopped fighting. As visitors file past the image one last time, many stopping to look closely at Naomi's face and see the strength behind that calm expression, the history behind that scar, the determination behind that direct gaze. Sarah thinks about all the other enslaved women who resisted sexual violence, all the other stories of courage that deserve to be told, all the other proof that enslaved women were not passive victims, but active resistors who defended themselves and each other when they could. Naomi Williams, born enslaved 1838, subjected to attempted rape dozens of times beginning around age 15, successfully defended herself from assault by 3 different slave owners between 1858-1863, injured multiple men who tried to rape her, was beaten savagely and scarred permanently, was sold 3 times because her resistance made her dangerous, freed in 1865, gave testimony documenting sexual violence under slavery in 1866, married and had children, became an advocate for formerly enslaved women, lived until 1903 having proved that resistance was possible and having ensured her story would be preserved for history. Her story has been told. Her resistance has been honored. And Sarah is grateful to have played a part in ensuring that Naomi Williams is remembered as the woman who could not be touched, not because no one tried, but because she fought back every single time and never surrendered her right to defend herself.